ignored in my grief for a birthday party. Until the will was read. I'm Elena Marlowe. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a quiet part of Vermont, in the same house where I grew up. But it hasn't felt like home in a very long time. You know that feeling when you're drowning, but everyone around you is having a pool party. That's what the last 3 weeks of my life have felt like. My father died on a Tuesday. It was sudden. A heart attack at his office, slumped over the architectural drawings he'd been working on for the new community center. One moment he was there, pencil in hand, probably humming that old jazz tune he loved, and the next, nothing. I found out from a phone call. Not from my mother, not from my sister. From his business partner, Marcus, who could barely get the words out through his own tears. "Elena," he said. And I knew. Before he even said it, I knew. The way he said my name, like it was made of glass and might shatter if he wasn't careful, told me everything. I dropped the phone and didn't pick it up for an hour. Just sat on my kitchen floor, staring at the morning light streaming through the windows, wondering how the world could look exactly the same when everything had just ended. The funeral was 5 days later. 5 days of numbness punctuated by moments of grief so sharp they took my breath away. I organized everything, of course. That's what I do. I handle things. While my mother, Margot, held court in the living room accepting condolences like she was receiving Oscar nominations, and my sister Sienna posted carefully curated black and white photos on Instagram with captions about celebrating a life well lived, I arranged flowers, coordinated with the funeral home, and wrote my father's obituary. Writing those words, beloved husband and father, felt like cutting my heart out with a dull knife. Beloved. He was that, at least to me. But as I sat at his old desk, surrounded by his architectural sketches and the faint smell of his cologne still lingering on his sweater draped over the chair, I wondered if anyone else truly understood what we'd lost. The service was beautiful. In that generic way, funerals are when they're planned by funeral directors instead of daughters. The pastor who barely knew my father spoke in platitudes about a life of service and loving family. I wanted to stand up and scream, "You don't know him. You don't know about the nights he taught myself to read star maps on the roof, or how he saved every drawing I ever made, or how he used to leave me little notes in my lunchbox even when I was in high school because he knew I felt invisible there too." But I didn't scream. I sat in the front pew, wearing the black dress I'd bought specifically for this moment I'd been dreading my entire adult life, and I cried quietly while my mother dabbed at perfectly waterproof mascara, and Sienna took selfies with relatives who'd driven hours to be there. That's when she announced it. 3 days after we buried my father, as I was sitting in his study going through his papers, trying to make sense of insurance policies and bank accounts, Sienna bounced in wearing a bright pink top that seemed like a slap in the face. "Elena," she said, like she was announcing good news. "I've been thinking, and I really don't want to cancel my birthday party. Daddy wouldn't want me to be sad, you know? He'd want me to celebrate life." I stared at her. Actually stared. "Your birthday party?" "Yeah, it's going to be amazing. We're doing it at the country club. I already put down the deposit before, and all my friends are expecting it. And Blake is flying in from California specifically for this." Blake was whatever man she was dating that month. I'd stopped keeping track. "Sienna," I said slowly. "Dad died 8 days ago." She waved her hand, like she was swatting away a fly. "I know, and it's terrible, obviously. But life goes on, right? That's what everyone keeps saying. Besides, it's my 25th. This is like a milestone birthday. I can't just skip it." The air in the room felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. "We buried him 3 days ago." "Elena, you're being dramatic. It's not like we're having it at the funeral parlor." She laughed at her own joke, and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard. "Come on. It'll be good for all of us. We need something happy to focus on. Mom agrees with me. Of course she did. Of course Margot agreed with Sienna. When had she ever not? I don't think I'm ready for a party, I said quietly. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for a party, but definitely not now. Sienna's face shifted, and for a moment I saw something that might have been sympathy. But then it hardened into that familiar expression I'd been seeing my whole life. The one that said I was being inconvenient. Look, Elena, I get that you're sad. We're all sad. But you can't expect the whole world to stop because you're grieving. Some of us are trying to move forward. Some of us. Like I was the only one mourning. Like grief was a choice I was making to be difficult. The party planning consumed the next 4 days. Our house. My father's house, where he'd lived for 37 years, where his coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter because I couldn't bring myself to wash it, became command central for Sienna's celebration. Florists came and went. Caterers called constantly. The dining room where we'd eaten quiet family dinners was covered in fabric samples and seating charts. I tried to escape to my father's study, but even there I could hear them. My mother's voice, animated in a way it hadn't been since before Dad got sick last year, directing operations like a general planning a campaign. Sienna's laughter echoing through the house as she tried on dress after dress, FaceTiming friends to get their opinions on her look. I remember standing in his closet on Thursday evening, just holding one of his shirts against my face, breathing, in the scent of him, when I heard my mother say, "Well, we'll just have to work around Elena's mood. She'll come around when she realizes she's being selfish. Selfish for grieving my father." I walked downstairs to find them in the kitchen, surrounded by catering menus and flower arrangements, looking like they were planning the social event of the season instead of a birthday party for a daughter whose father had just died. "I can hear you," I said. My mother looked up, not even having the grace to look ashamed. "Elena, honey, we need to talk about Saturday." "What about Saturday?" "Well, it's Sienna's party, and we're all going to need to put our best faces forward. This is important for her, and frankly, we could all use something positive right now." Something positive. I repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "Yes, and I know you're having a hard time, but you can't bring everyone down with your energy. My energy. My grief energy, presumably." Sienna jumped in, because she couldn't stand not being the center of attention for more than 30 seconds. "What Mom's trying to say is that this party is really important to me, and I need my family to be supportive, which means being happy and social and not making it weird." "Making it weird," I echoed. "Yeah, like, I know you're sad about Dad, but that doesn't mean you have to be a downer at my party. People are coming to have fun, not to deal with this." She gestured vaguely at me, like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. I looked back and forth between them, these two women who shared my DNA but felt like strangers. "Dad died 12 days ago. Elena," my mother said with that tone she'd perfected when I was 5 years old. "I think you're wallowing. Your father wouldn't want you to wallow." That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a rubber band stretched too far. "You don't get to tell me what my father would want," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "You barely spoke to him the last 2 years of his life except to complain about money or ask him to fix something." My mother's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "How dare I what?" "Tell the truth?" "You stopped loving him years ago, Mom. You turned into this bitter woman who treated him like a roommate you were annoyed with. And now you're going to stand there and tell me what he would want." Sienna stepped between us like a referee. "Okay, let's not do this. Let's not make this about Dad when it's supposed to be about my birthday. Everything about my birthday. My birthday." Like the universe revolved around her, and the rest of us were just supporting characters in her story. You know what? I said, looking directly at Sienna. You're right. This is about your birthday. So let me be very clear. I will not be attending your party. I will not smile and pretend everything is fine while you celebrate yourself 3 days after we buried our father. I will not be your emotional entertainment. The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring. Then Sienna started crying. Not the ugly, honest crying I'd been doing for 2 weeks. The pretty, manipulative crying she'd perfected as a child to get out of trouble. Elena's ruining everything, she said to Mom, like I wasn't standing right there. I just want one day where we can be happy as a family, and she's ruining it because she wants all the attention on her, all the attention on me. Because that's what I'd always gotten in this family, so much attention, so much that I'd spent my entire childhood feeling invisible, while Sienna collected trophies and praise like Halloween candy. My mother put her arms around Sienna, shooting me a look that could have frozen lava. Elena Marie Marlowe, you apologize. To your sister right now. No. The word came out so simply, so quietly, that for a moment I don't think they heard me. Excuse me, Mom said. No, I will not apologize for grieving my father. I will not apologize for refusing to pretend everything is normal when it's not. And I will not apologize for finally saying what needs to be said in this house. Walked upstairs to my room, the same room I'd had as a child, because I'd never quite figured out how to leave this place. And I locked the door. For the next 3 days, I barely came out. I could hear them planning and preparing and primping, turning our home into a stage set for Sienna's performance. Saturday arrived like a storm I could see coming but couldn't stop. The party was supposed to start at 7, but the preparations began at dawn. Trucks arrived with tables and chairs and a sound system that they set up in our backyard. The backyard where my father had taught me to garden, where we'd sat together summer evenings talking about everything and nothing while fireflies danced between the tomato plants. I watched from my bedroom window as they transformed his garden into a party venue, white tents and string lights, and a bar where his tool shed used to cast shadows. It was beautiful, objectively. It was also a desecration. Around noon, Sienna knocked on my door. Elena? Can I come in? I almost didn't answer, but something in her voice, a note I didn't recognize, made me unlock the door. She stood there in a silk robe with her hair in curlers, looking younger than her 25 years. For a moment, she looked like the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I wanted to ask you one more time, she said. Will you please come tonight? Please? I know things have been hard, but you're my sister. I studied her face, looking for something real beneath the practiced vulnerability. Sienna, do you miss him at all? She blinked. Miss who? Dad. Of course I miss Dad. That's such a weird question. Is it? Because you haven't seemed to miss him. You've seemed relieved. Her face changed then, closing off like a door slamming shut. That's a horrible thing to say. Is it untrue? She stared at me for a long moment, and I thought maybe we were about to have the first honest conversation we'd had in years. But then she straightened her shoulders and became Sienna again. The performer, the golden child, the center of every universe she entered. I'm not going to let you make me feel guilty for choosing to be happy, she said. I'm not going to apologize for not falling apart like you have. Falling apart, like grief was a moral failing. I'm not falling apart, Sienna. I'm mourning. There's a difference. Well, whatever you want to call it, I'm not doing it. And I'm not canceling my party because you can't handle life going on. She left, and I locked the door again. The party started at 7, just as planned. From my window, I watched the guests arrive in their cocktail dresses and sport coats, air-kissing and laughing, carrying beautifully wrapped gifts. The string lights cast everything in a warm, golden glow, and I could hear the jazz quartet. Not my father's kind of jazz, but the sanitized, party-appropriate version, playing softly as people mingled. It was a beautiful party. Perfect. Even. Everything Sienna had wanted, and it was taking place in my father's backyard 2 weeks after we'd buried him. I tried to read. I tried to watch Netflix. I tried to do anything that would block out the sound of celebration happening beneath my window. But around 9 o'clock, I heard my mother's voice rise above the crowd. "I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate our beautiful Sienna," she said, and the crowd quieted. "I know the last few weeks have been difficult for our family, but tonight is about joy. It's about celebrating life and love, and all the beautiful things that make life worth living." I pressed my face against the window and saw her standing on the little platform they'd erected, microphone in hand, every inch the grieving widow who had somehow found the strength to carry on. The crowd was eating it up, nodding and murmuring approval. "My husband Robert always said that life is for the living," she continued, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my stomach. "He would have wanted us to be here tonight, celebrating his baby girl, because that's the kind of man he was. He always put family first. Family first. The man who had worked 60-hour weeks to pay for Sienna's pageant dresses and dance lessons and spring break trips. The man who had quietly paid my college tuition without ever making me feel like a burden. The man who had loved us both, even when we didn't deserve it. So tonight, we celebrate not just Sienna's birthday, but the legacy of love that Robert left behind. We celebrate the way he taught us to find joy even in difficult times." The applause was thunderous. I could see Sienna on the platform next to Mom, crying those perfect tears that somehow made her more beautiful, instead of blotchy and swollen like a normal person. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. I went downstairs, not bothering to change out of the pajamas and cardigan I'd been wearing for 3 days. I walked through the kitchen, past the caterers who were too polite to stare, and out the back door into the party. The first person who saw me was my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who had driven up from Boston specifically for this event. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, concern, embarrassment. "Elena, honey," she said, approaching me like I was a wild animal that might bolt. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, loud enough that several nearby conversations stopped. I just wanted to hear more about my father's legacy of joy. More people were turning to look now. The jazz quartet faltered, and then stopped playing altogether. My mother spotted me from the platform, and her face went white. Sienna followed her. Gaze and I watched her expression shift from birthday girl radiance to something approaching panic. "Elena," Mom said into the microphone, her voice tight. "How wonderful that you decided to join us." I walked closer to the platform, aware that I was creating a scene, aware that this was probably the last thing my father would have wanted, but unable to stop myself. "I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "We're celebrating Dad's legacy of putting family first by throwing a party 2 weeks after his funeral?" A murmur went through the crowd. I could see people exchanging glances, sensing drama but not understanding the context. "Elena," Sienna said into her microphone, "this isn't the time or place, isn't it?" I interrupted. "When exactly is the time and place? Because apparently, it's not during the funeral planning. When you were too busy coordinating your Instagram posts. It's not during the burial, when you spent the entire service texting. And it's not in the days after, when you decided that grieving was wallowing and we all needed to move forward." The crowd was shifting uncomfortably now. I could see people looking toward the exits, calculating whether they should stay for the drama or flee before it got worse. My mother stepped forward. "Elena, you're embarrassing yourself." Am I? Or am I finally telling the truth about what this family actually is? I turned to face the crowd of people who had come to celebrate my sister, while my father's body was still settling into his grave. For those of you who don't know, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My father died 16 days ago. We buried him 13 days ago. This party, this celebration of life and joy and moving forward, is happening in the backyard, where he spent every weekend for 20 years, growing the tomatoes he'd share with all the neighbors, building the tree house that Sienna never played in because she was always too busy being fabulous somewhere else. Elena, stop. This from Sienna, who had stepped down from the platform and was walking toward me. Why should I stop? Someone should tell them. Someone should tell them that the man they're supposedly honoring tonight worked himself into an early grave trying to keep up with your dreams and mom's expectations. Someone should mention that he never took a vacation because every spare dollar went to your pageants and your dance competitions and your spring break trips to Cabo. The crowd was definitely uncomfortable now. I could see Blake, that month's boyfriend, looking around like he was trying to find someone to rescue him from this awkward family moment he'd accidentally wandered into. Elena? My mother's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. That's enough, is it? Because I don't think I've said nearly enough. I don't think I've mentioned how Dad never missed one of Sienna's recitals, even when he was working 18-hour days to pay for them. Or how he drove 4 hours to bring her soup when she had the flu freshman year of college. Or how he sat up all night helping her with her business plan for that boutique that lasted exactly 6 months before she got bored and moved on to the next thing. Sienna was crying now, but not the pretty tears. Real tears, ugly and desperate. "Stop it," she said. "Just stop it. You're ruining everything." "I'm ruining everything?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh even to my own ears. "Sienna, sweetheart, I didn't ruin anything. You ruined it the moment you decided that your birthday party was more important than mourning our father." That's when she slapped me. Not hard, not enough to actually hurt, but the sound cracked across the silent backyard like a gunshot. The crowd made a collective gasp, and for a moment, we all just stared at each other. Then I smiled. Actually smiled, because suddenly everything was crystal clear. "Thank you," I said to Sienna. "Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you are." I turned and walked back toward the house, leaving behind the wreckage of my sister's perfect party and my mother's carefully constructed family image. Behind me, I could hear Mom trying to salvage the situation, her voice bright and desperate as she urged everyone to please continue enjoying themselves, to not let this little family moment spoil the celebration. But I was done. Done with their version of our family. Done with pretending that their way of handling grief was somehow healthier than mine. Done with being the family scapegoat who was always too much or not enough, but never just right. I spent the rest of the evening in Dad's study, reading through his old journals. He'd kept them sporadically, mostly during the years when Sienna was competing in pageants, and Mom was consumed with managing her career. The entries were brief, usually just observations about work, or the weather, or small moments of family life. But there were entries about me, too. Notes about conversations we'd had, pride in my college graduation, worry about whether I was happy. In one entry from 3 years ago, he'd written, "Elena is the most genuinely good person I know. I worry that she doesn't see her own worth because she spent so long being overshadowed. I hope someday she realizes that being quiet doesn't mean being invisible, and being kind doesn't mean being weak." I cried reading that. Cried for the father who had seen me, really seen me, even when I felt most invisible. Cried for all the conversations we'd never have, all the quiet moments we'd never share. Cried because he was gone, and I was alone in a house full of people who had never really known me at all. The party ended around midnight. I listened to the cleanup, the goodbyes, the gradual return to silence. Neither Mom nor Sienna came to check on me, which wasn't surprising. I had, after all, ruined Sienna's perfect night. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, which felt appropriate. I made coffee in Dad's favorite mug. I'd finally worked up the courage to wash it, and sat in his chair by the kitchen window, watching the caterers finish removing the remnants of the party from our backyard. Mom appeared around 10, still in her silk pajamas, looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" She poured herself coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table where we'd eaten breakfast as a family for most of my childhood. For a moment, she looked like the mother I remembered from before Sienna became her full-time project. "What you did last night was unforgivable," she said. I nodded. "I figured you'd see it that way." "Elena, I understand that you're grieving. We all are. But you humiliated your sister in front of all her friends. You made a scene at what was supposed to be a celebration. I told the truth. Your version of the truth. The only version that matters." We sat in silence for a moment, the kitchen filled with 17 years of unspoken resentments and disappointments. "Your father wouldn't have wanted this," she said finally. "You're right," I agreed. "Dad wouldn't have wanted any of this. He wouldn't have wanted Sienna to throw a party 2 weeks after his funeral. He wouldn't have wanted you to call my grief wallowing. He wouldn't have wanted his family to fall apart the moment he wasn't there to hold it together." Mom's face crumpled slightly, and for a second, I thought she might actually hear me. But then she straightened, rebuilding her defenses in real time. "I think you should leave," she said. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. "Leave?" "I think you need some time to get your head straight. You're clearly not ready to be around family right now. Maybe some space would be good for all of us." I stared at her. This woman who had given birth to me, raised me, shared a house with me for 32 years, and was now kicking me out for grieving incorrectly. "This is my home too," I said quietly. "This is my house, Elena. Mine and your father's. And since he's gone, it's mine. And I don't want this kind of negativity around Sienna right now. She's fragile." Sienna was fragile. Sienna, who had just thrown herself a birthday party funded by our dead father's life insurance money, was fragile. "Fine," I said, standing up. "I'll pack my things." "Elena." But I was already walking away, already done with the conversation, and the kitchen, and the house that had never really felt like home anyway. It took me 2 hours to pack everything that mattered. Clothes, books, the few pieces of jewelry Dad had given me over the years, and his journals. I left behind most of the furniture. It had never really been mine anyway, and loaded everything into my Honda Civic. Mom was nowhere to be seen when I carried my boxes downstairs. Sienna was, though, sitting on the living room couch in her silk pajamas, scrolling through her phone and looking like she'd been crying. "Elena," she said without looking up. "Are you really leaving? Seems like the best thing for everyone. I didn't want you to leave. I just wanted you to stop being so angry all the time." I set down the box I was carrying and looked at her, really looked at her. She was 25 years old, beautiful and privileged, and utterly convinced that the world revolved around her, but in that moment, she also looked very young and very lost. "Sienna," I said, "I'm not angry all the time. I'm sad. I'm heartbroken. Our father died, and I miss him so much I can barely breathe some days. That's not anger. That's grief." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were red and puffy. "I miss him too. Do you? Because it doesn't seem like you do. It seems like you barely noticed he was gone." "That's not fair, isn't it? You threw yourself a birthday party 2 weeks after his funeral, Sienna. You used his life insurance money to pay for flowers and catering while his bedroom still smells like his cologne. You made me feel like I was being unreasonable for mourning him." She was quiet for a long moment, picking at the hem of her pajama top. "I just didn't want to be sad," she said finally. "I hate being sad. It makes me feel ugly and out of control, and I didn't want to feel that way. The party was supposed to make me feel better. And there it was. the truth that had been lurking under all the performance and drama. Sienna couldn't handle difficult emotions, so she simply refused to feel them. But you can't just decide not to be sad when someone you love dies, I said gently. That's not how grief works. Well, maybe. Your way isn't the only way either, she snapped. And just like that, the moment of vulnerability was gone. Maybe some of us don't want to wallow in misery for months. I picked up my box and headed for the door. Maybe some of us don't have a choice. I found a furnished studio apartment across town that same day. It was small and impersonal, but it was quiet, and it was mine. For the first time in weeks, I could grieve without an audience, without judgment, without someone telling me I was doing it wrong. The days that followed were strange and peaceful. I took a leave of absence from my job at the marketing firm. They were understanding about family circumstances, and spent my time walking through Vermont's autumn landscape, reading Dad's journals, and slowly learning how to be alone with my grief. I didn't hear from Mom or Sienna for 2 weeks. Part of me expected them to call, to check on me, to maybe even apologize. But the silence stretched on, and I began to accept that I might have lost more than just my father. Then, on a Thursday morning in early November, my phone rang. It was Marcus, Dad's business partner. "Elena," he said, and his voice had that careful quality again. "I need you to come to the office. There's some legal business we need to take care of." "Legal business?" "Your father's will. The reading is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Your mother and sister will be there too." My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about the will entirely, too consumed with grief and family drama to think about practical matters like inheritance and legal documents. "Do I need to bring anything?" "Just yourself. And Elena, I think you should prepare yourself. Your father, well, he had some things to say." I spent that evening in a state of nervous anticipation I couldn't quite name. Dad had always been straightforward. About money, we weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and I'd assumed whatever he left behind would be split evenly between Mom, Sienna, and me. But something in Marcus's voice suggested it wasn't going to be that simple. Friday morning arrived cold and bright. I dressed carefully in the black suit I'd worn to the funeral, applied minimal makeup, and drove to Dad's architectural firm for what I suspected would be the last time. The office building was modest but well-maintained, reflecting Dad's aesthetic of functional beauty. His name was still on the door, Marlowe and Associates Architecture. I wondered how long it would stay there. Marcus met me in the lobby, and I could see the strain of the last month in his face. He and Dad had been partners for 15 years, friends even longer. "How are you holding up?" he asked, giving me a hug that smelled like coffee and drafting paper. "I'm surviving," I said, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. That's all any of us can do right now. He led me upstairs to the conference room, where Mom and Sienna were already seated at the long table. Mom looked perfectly put together in a navy dress and pearls, every inch the dignified widow. Sienna was scrolling through her phone, wearing a black outfit that managed to be both funeral appropriate and Instagram ready. Neither of them acknowledged me when I sat down. The lawyer arrived a few minutes later, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Hendricks, who had handled Dad's legal affairs for years. I'd met her briefly at the funeral, where she'd expressed her condolences and mentioned that we'd need to meet soon about settling Robert's affairs. "Thank you all for being here," Patricia said, settling herself at the head of the table with a thick folder. "I know this is difficult, but we need to go through Robert's final wishes." She opened the folder and pulled out several documents, including what appeared to be a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Dad's careful handwriting. "Robert's will is relatively straightforward in most respects," Patricia began. "However, there are some specific provisions and requests that he wanted me to address directly." She looked around the table, her expression professionally neutral, but somehow meaningful. "First, the house. Robert has left the family home to Elena. The words hit the room like a physical blow. I felt my mother go rigid beside me. Heard Sienna's sharp intake of breath. "I'm sorry," Mom said, her voice tight. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Marlowe. The house, including all contents and the surrounding property, goes to Elena." I stared at Patricia, certain I'd misheard. "The whole house?" "The whole house. Your father was very specific about this." Sienna found her voice. "But Mom lives there. I grew up there. Elena doesn't even live there anymore." "That brings me to the next provision," Patricia continued calmly. "Robert has established a trust fund for Sienna's ongoing expenses, education, housing, reasonable living costs, but with specific conditions attached." "What kind of conditions?" Sienna's voice had gone shrill. Patricia consulted her notes. "The trust will provide support for practical necessities: rent, utilities, groceries, healthcare, educational expenses if you choose to pursue further schooling. However, it specifically excludes what Robert termed lifestyle expenses: designer, clothing, luxury vacations, expensive dining, entertainment beyond reasonable limits." The silence that followed was deafening. "He can't do that," Sienna said. "He can't control how I spend money from beyond the grave." "Actually, he can," Patricia replied. "It's his money, and trust funds with specific parameters are perfectly legal." "What about me?" Mom asked, and I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. "Margot, you'll receive Robert's life insurance payout, his retirement accounts, and a monthly allowance from the estate. However, since Elena now owns the house, you'll need to make alternative living arrangements." The room felt like it was spinning. I looked back and forth between Mom and Sienna, both of whom appeared to be in shock. "I don't understand," I said. "Why would he do this?" Patricia reached for the sealed envelope with my name on it. "He asked me to give you this. He said it would explain everything." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded several pages of my father's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Elena," it began, and I had to blink back tears to continue reading. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably confused about the decisions I've made regarding my estate. I need you to understand that every choice I made was deliberate and made with love. I've watched our family for many years, and I've seen things that I perhaps should have addressed while I was alive. I've seen you diminished and overlooked, your kindness taken for granted, your grief dismissed as inconvenience. I've seen your mother and sister take and take and take while giving very little in return. But I've also seen your strength, your integrity, your capacity for genuine love. You are the best of us, Elena. You always have been. The house goes to you, because you're the only one who ever truly appreciated it. You're the one who helped me in the garden, who sat with me on the porch, who understood that a home is more than just a place to live. It's a place to create memories and build love. Your mother hasn't been happy there in years, and Sienna never saw it as anything more than a staging ground for her ambitions. I know this decision will cause controversy. I know your mother will be angry and your sister will feel betrayed. But I also know that you're the only one who will use this inheritance not just for yourself, but to honor what our family could have been. As for Sienna's trust, I hope it will teach her something I failed to teach her while I was alive. That love cannot be bought, that happiness doesn't come from things, and that real security comes from knowing who you are, not what you own. The Sitam. Restrictions aren't meant to punish her. They're meant to save her from a life of shallow pursuits that will never fulfill her. Your mother made her choices long ago. She chose to see you as less valuable than your sister, chose to prioritize appearance over substance, chose to let resentment poison her heart. The insurance money and allowance will keep her comfortable, but she'll need to learn to be independent for the first time in decades. Maybe that will be good for her too. Elena, I need you to know that every quiet moment we shared was precious. To me. Every conversation about books and dreams and the meaning of life. Every evening spent watching stars. Every time you helped me understand that being gentle doesn't mean being weak. Those moments were when I felt most like the father I wanted to be. You were my conscience, my reminder of what really matters. When work stress was overwhelming me, when your mother's criticism was wearing me down, when Sienna's endless demands were exhausting me, I would think of you. Your kindness, your thoughtfulness, your ability to find beauty in simple things, and remember why I was working so hard in the first place. I'm sorry I didn't protect you more from their treatment. I'm sorry I didn't speak up when they dismissed your feelings or overlooked your accomplishments. I thought my quiet support was enough, but I realize now that you needed me to be louder, braver, more willing to confront the family dynamics that were hurting you. This inheritance is my way of saying what I should have said out loud every day. You matter. Your feelings matter. Your dreams matter. You deserve to be seen and heard and valued, not just for what you do for others, but for who you are. The house is yours now, but more than that, the choice is yours. You can live there and fill it with the love it's been missing. You can sell it and start fresh somewhere new. You can turn it into something entirely different. Whatever you choose it for yourself, not because it's what someone else wants or expects. I've also left you my architectural drawings and journals, not because they're valuable, but because they represent dreams and hopes and the belief that we can build something beautiful from nothing. You have that same ability, Elena. You can build a beautiful life from whatever materials you're given. Please don't let their anger poison your heart the way it poisoned your mother's. Please don't let their selfishness make you doubt your own worth. You are the daughter I'm most proud of, the person I most wanted to become like, the legacy I most hope to leave behind. And please, please allow yourself to grieve me properly. Don't let anyone tell you that mourning is wallowing or that sadness is selfish. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. Your grief is proof of how deeply you loved me, and I'm honored by it. Live fully, my dear girl. Love deeply. Build something beautiful. And remember that every day you choose kindness. Over cruelty, you're carrying the best part of me forward. All my love, always and forever, Dad P.S. There's one more thing in my safe deposit box that belongs to you. Marcus has the key. I finished reading through a blur of tears, aware that the conference room had gone completely silent. When I looked up, I saw 3 faces staring at me with very different expressions. Patricia looked sympathetic but unsurprised. She'd probably read this letter before today. Marcus looked sad but somehow relieved, like a burden he'd been carrying had finally been set down. Mom looked furious. Sienna just looked shocked. Well, Mom said, her voice sharp enough to cut. I suppose that tells us exactly what Robert really thought of his family. Mrs. Marlowe, Patricia said gently, I understand this is difficult, but... Difficult? Mom's voice rose. My husband just gave away our home to a daughter who couldn't even be bothered to attend her sister's birthday party. A daughter who caused a scene and embarrassed our family. A daughter who walked out rather than work through our problems like an adult. I folded Dad's letter carefully, my hand steadier than I felt. He gave the house to the daughter who loved it and him. You don't have a monopoly on love, Elena, don't I? The words came out before I could stop them. When's the last time you told him you loved him, Mom? When's the last time you asked about his day or his dreams or whether he was happy? When's the last time you treated him like a partner? Instead of a paycheck? Her face went white, then red. How dare you? How dare I tell the truth? How dare I point out that you spent the last 5 years of his life criticizing everything he did and complaining about everything he didn't do? How dare I mention that you haven't shed a real tear since he died, but you've already started planning how to spend his life insurance money? That's enough, Sienna said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. I turned to look at her. This sister who had been the center of our family's universe for so long that she'd forgotten other people, had gravity too. Is it enough, Sienna? Because I don't think I've said nearly enough. I don't think I've mentioned how Dad worked himself to death paying for your dreams while you never once asked if he had dreams of his own. I don't think I've talked about how he attended every one of your competitions and performances. But you couldn't even be bothered to visit him in the hospital when he had that scare last year because you were in Cancun with friends. That's not fair, she whispered. None of this is fair. It wasn't fair that Dad died at 63 because he spent his whole life trying to make everyone else happy. It wasn't fair that he worked 18-hour days to pay for your lifestyle. It wasn't fair that he had to write me a letter from beyond the grave to tell me he loved me because he never felt safe saying it out loud in front of you two. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier, more final. Patricia cleared her throat. There are some papers to sign, Elena. And Marcus, you mentioned something about a safe deposit box? Marcus nodded, reaching into his briefcase. Your father asked me to give you this after the will reading. He handed me a small key. Box 247 at First National. He said you'd understand what to do with what's inside. I took the key, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. My father had given me a house, a letter that explained 32 years of family dynamics, and apparently one more surprise waiting in a bank vault. I need some air, I said, standing up. Elena, wait, Sienna called after me. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what happens now. I paused at the door and looked back at her. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to follow me around the house, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to ask me to read her stories because she liked the way I did different voices for different characters. What happens now, I said gently, is that you learn to take care of yourself. What happens now is that Mom learns to live independently instead of depending on someone else to provide for her. What happens now is that maybe, finally, you both learn what Dad spent his whole life trying to teach us. That love isn't something you take, it's something you give. I left them sitting in that conference room and drove straight to the bank. The safe deposit box was small, but what was inside took my breath away. There were documents, the deed to a small piece of land I'd never heard of, investment accounts I didn't know existed, and a folder labeled for Elena's future. But there was also something else. A wooden box I recognized from Dad's desk, and inside it, every card I'd ever made him, every note I'd ever written him, every school photo from kindergarten through college graduation. At the bottom was a small notebook I'd never seen before. I opened it to find page after page of things he'd written about me over the years. Not a journal exactly, but a collection of moments. Elena, age 7, spent her allowance on flowers for Margot's birthday. Margot complained that they were weeds from the neighbor's garden, but Elena had picked them so carefully, choosing colors she thought would make her mother smile. Elena, age 12, stayed up all night helping Sienna with her history project even though Sienna had teased her about her braces all week. Elena never expects gratitude, but she deserves it. Elena, age 16, turned down the school dance to sit with me in the hospital when I had my appendix out. She brought homework and said she'd rather spend Saturday night helping me with crossword puzzles than dancing with some boy who probably didn't deserve her anyway. She was right on both counts. Elena, age 23, called every Sunday during her first year of work just to check on me. Not on the family, on me. Asked about my projects, my health, whether I was reading anything interesting. Margot complained that Elena never asked about her, but Elena knows her mother doesn't really want to be asked about. Elena understands the difference between attention and interest. Elena, age 28, spent her vacation days helping me clean out the attic. Found my old college notebooks and spent hours asking me about my architecture classes, my professors, my dreams of designing something that would outlast me. No one else had ever asked me about those dreams. Page after page of moments I'd forgotten, or never realized were significant. Evidence of a father who had been paying attention, who had seen me even when I felt invisible, who had been quietly collecting proof of my worth for years. The last entry was dated just 3 weeks before he died. Elena, age 32, came over to help me organize my drafting table, found me looking at old photos of family vacations, and instead of rushing me or making me feel foolish for being sentimental, she sat down and asked me to tell her about each one. We spent 2 hours talking about memories, about regrets, about hopes. She listened like my words mattered. She always listens like that. I hope someday someone loves her the way she loves others. Completely, generously, without expecting anything in return. She deserves that kind of love. I sat in that sterile bank vault and cried until I had no tears left. Cried for the father who had seen me so clearly, loved me so deeply, and somehow found a way to tell me even after death. Cried for all the years I'd felt overlooked and undervalued, not knowing that someone was keeping a careful record of every kindness, every moment of grace, every time I'd chosen love over resentment. But mostly, I cried with relief, because for the first time in my life I had proof that I mattered, not because of what I could do for someone else, not because I was useful or convenient or easy to manage, but because of who I was. The drive back to my little apartment was surreal. I kept expecting to wake up, to discover that the morning had been an elaborate dream. But the key to my childhood home was real in my pocket, and Dad's letter was real in my purse, and the knowledge that he had loved me. Really, truly, intentionally loved me, was settling into my bones like warmth. My phone had been buzzing throughout the drive, but I didn't check it until I was safely inside my apartment. 17 missed calls from Mom, 12 from Sienna, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. From Mom. Elena, we need to talk about this rationally. Your father wasn't thinking clearly. We can contest the will. From Sienna. This is crazy. You can't just take our house. Where is Mom supposed to live? From Mom. You're being vindictive. This isn't what Robert would have wanted. From Sienna. Please call me back. We're family. We can work this out. From Mom. If you think I'm going to let you destroy this family over money, you're mistaken. From Sienna. Elena, I'm scared. I don't know how to live without Dad's money. Please don't abandon me. That last message stopped me cold. For the first time since the lawyer's office, Sienna sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of manipulative. She sounded like a 25-year-old woman who had never learned to take care of herself because there had always been someone else to do it for her. I thought about calling her back. I thought about driving over to the house, my house, and trying to explain what Dad had been trying to teach us all. I thought about being the bigger person, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over family conflicts and made everyone comfortable. But then I remembered Dad's letter. Please don't. Let their anger poison your heart the way it poisoned your mother's. Instead of calling back, I made myself dinner. A real dinner, with vegetables and seasoning and care taken in the preparation. I hadn't cooked for myself in weeks, subsisting on takeout and grief. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the beginning of something. After dinner, I sat down and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Mom. I understand you're angry about Dad's will, but I won't apologize for his choices or change my mind about honoring them. The house was his to give, and he gave it to me for reasons he explained clearly in his letter. You have enough money to live comfortably, and for the first time in decades, you have the opportunity to build a life that's truly your own, instead of one built around managing other people's needs and expectations. I hope you'll use this chance to rediscover who you are when you're not being critical, not being disappointed, not being resentful. Dad loved you once. I remember. Maybe you can find your way back to the person he fell in love with. I won't be contesting Dad's will or changing his arrangements, but I also won't be engaging in arguments about it. His decision was final, and so is mine. Love, Elena. The second letter was to Sienna. I know you're scared, and I understand why. You've never had to be responsible for yourself, and now you're facing the prospect of living within limits for the first time in your adult life. But Dad's trust isn't a punishment. It's a gift. It's a chance to discover what you actually want, instead of what you think you should want. It's an opportunity to find out who you are when you can't buy your way out of discomfort or boredom. You're smart and beautiful and capable of so much more than you've allowed yourself to become. But you'll never discover your real strengths as long as there's a safety net that lets you avoid developing them. I love you, Sienna. I always have. But I love you too much to enable the person you've become at the expense of the person you could be. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it will be based on who we actually are, not who we've pretended to be for the sake of family peace. I hope you'll find that something you want too. Love, Elena. I mailed both letters the next morning, then drove out to the house to see it with new eyes. It looked different already somehow. Less like the place where I'd spent my childhood feeling invisible, and more like the home Dad had always seen it as. The garden was dormant for winter, but I could see the bones of it. The careful layout, the thought behind each planting, the love that had shaped every corner. I used my new key to let myself in, and the silence that greeted me was different too. Not the oppressive quiet of a house full of people who couldn't really talk to each other, but the peaceful quiet of a space waiting to be filled with new life. I walked through each room slowly, seeing them not as shrines to my childhood, but as blank canvases. The living room where Sienna had held court could become a library, lined with bookshelves and filled with comfortable reading chairs. The formal dining room that had hosted so many tense family meals could become an art studio, flooded with light and creativity. Dad's study would stay exactly as it was, his sanctuary preserved, his presence still tangible in every carefully organized drawer and shelf. But it was the kitchen that made me cry again. Standing in the space where we'd had our last real conversation, where he'd asked me about my dreams and I'd been too afraid to admit I had any, I could finally hear what he'd been trying to tell me all along. You matter. Your dreams matter. Build something beautiful. Over the next few weeks, I began to do exactly that. I gave notice on the studio apartment and started the process of moving back home. Not to the childhood bedroom where I'd hidden from family drama, but to the master bedroom where I could wake up each morning surrounded by light and possibility. I called a contractor about converting the basement into a proper apartment. Not because I felt guilty about Mom's housing situation, but because I thought Dad would have liked the idea of the house providing for someone in need. I posted an ad for a tenant who would appreciate quiet evenings and a beautiful garden, someone who understood that a home was more than just a place to sleep. I enrolled in an online architecture program, finally admitting that I'd always been fascinated by Dad's work, had always wondered what it would be like to design spaces that could change how people felt. At 32, it wasn't too late to chase a dream I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Most importantly, I started therapy. Not because there was something wrong with me, but because I wanted to understand how to build healthy relationships after a lifetime of unhealthy ones. I wanted to learn how to recognize love that was real, instead of love that was conditional. I wanted to break the patterns that had shaped my family for generations. Mom and Sienna didn't respond to my letters directly, but I heard through the family grapevine that Mom had rented a condo in town and was apparently adjusting to her new circumstances. Sienna had moved in with her friend Ashley and was working part-time at a boutique, the first job she'd ever held that wasn't funded by Dad's guilt and love. I hoped they were both learning what Dad had wanted them to learn. I hoped they were discovering who they could be when they had to rely on themselves, instead of other people's endless capacity for sacrifice. But mostly, I hoped they were finding their way toward the kind of happiness that doesn't require anyone else to be smaller. The first Christmas after Dad died, I spent alone in the house. Not because I was hiding from family or wallowing in grief, but because I wanted to create new traditions that honored who I was instead of who I'd been expected to be. I cooked dinner for myself, not the elaborate meal Mom would have insisted on, not the Instagram-worthy spread Sienna would have preferred, but comfort food that reminded me of quiet evenings with Dad. I lit candles throughout the house, not for romance, but for the way the soft light made everything feel peaceful and sacred. And I hung stockings by the fireplace, one for me and one for Dad. Because love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. In his stocking, I put a letter telling him about the changes I was making, the dreams I was finally brave enough to pursue, the woman I was becoming in his absence. In mine, I found the gifts he'd been giving me all along. Permission to take up space, validation of my worth, and the knowledge that someone had seen me clearly and loved me completely. As I sat by the fire that night, reading through his old architectural journals and planning my own future, I realized something that would have surprised the grieving woman who'd been kicked out of this house 6 months earlier. I was happy. Not the manic, desperate happiness that requires constant maintenance and validation, but the quiet, steady happiness that comes from knowing who you are and choosing to honor that knowledge every single day. I was Elena Marlowe. I was 32 years old. I lived in a house full of love and memory and possibility. And for the first time in my life, it felt like home. The grief was still there. It would always be there, woven into the fabric of who I was now. But it had transformed from something that was destroying me into something that was building me into a person Dad would be proud of. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance he could have given me. Not just a house or money, or even a letter explaining his love, but the courage to become the person I'd always been, underneath the fear and the silence, and the desperate need to be enough. I was enough. I had always been enough. And now, finally, I knew it.